We're set to open up next week is what they're saying.
Praying for you. Praying for you.
Thank you. I'm going to go myself on mute again until we speak, okay? Just
okay. No problem.
So the question will be on YouTube, writing.
Sorry, do you see my screen?
Yep. Please.
Sorry, do you see my screen?
Yes. We can see you, but do you want to share your screen?
Yes.
Please share it.
Can you see it? Okay, thank you.
Do you have voice on a presentation? Catalina?
Sorry?
Do you have voice on the presentation?
No, I will speak freely.
Oh, okay.
Guys, just to warn you, we are already in YouTube.
Behave yourselves.
Behave yourselves, yes. We are live and we can say hi to the YouTube audience and we are waiting a little bit.
The idea is, please, I will ask everyone to respect the 7 minutes. If you have any watch, alarm, or chronometer with you in your cell phones, please use it. The only exceptions will be Gaston and Rodrigo, because they are two. They will have 10 minutes, okay? And the last one will be Ike, who is our keynote speaker. Ike is gonna have 20 minutes. And at the end, if we have time and people didn't leave the room, I'll leave space for some questions.
I'm sorry, just one question. Mishev said that at the end of his presentation, we have something like 3 minutes questions. Do you change that?
The thing is, if you finish a little bit earlier, I can give time, but the problem, if you want to answer just after your video, I'll ask everyone to be really quick, because usually when we start to answer questions, we lose the time, the notion of time, okay?
No,
I will try to be flexible.
If everybody has 10 minutes, and if he uses the 10 minutes, then no questions. If he uses less than 10 minutes, you can have a couple of minutes of questions.
I have 4 minutes presentation, so you can use my time.
Okay, perfect.
And I have 5 or 6.
You.
I have mine.
Mine is also 5, so we will be flexible.
Yes, mine is 6, so we'll have.
Because if you leave the questions at the end, you forget, after so many people, you forget what you wanted to ask.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sure. My idea is to start in 10 minutes, so we'll give 5 extra minutes.
Could you tell who is the next speaker?
Gustavo.
Gustavo? Are you going to tell the name of the next speaker?
Yes, I will. I will call you. Don't worry. But I just sent in the WhatsApp group the order, so you have an idea when you have to be prepared.
Yeah. But just so we know when we finish the question. Session, so. Okay.
I'll send a message again, so you have it as your last message. If you have any problem, any doubt, you want to ask something, you can write privately through the Zoom application, or you can WhatsApp me, okay? start in 5. Ah, in 8, not in 5.
Gustavo, people
Yes?
in the chat on YouTube are asking how to they can they ask questions.
Okay, there is a place for that in the YouTube chat.
Yeah.
I'll write to them.
Okay.
Κατερίνα, μη φωνάζεις τόσο πολύ, ακούγεσαι όλο τον κόσμο.
Your son is online in YouTube, Athanasios.
He should be, otherwise I don't give him any more money. It's like your father doing with you.
The problem is that I eat too much, so I am more expensive than your son.
My son went to Paris and he hasn't seen Paris yet.
I believe.
He hasn't seen how Paris looks like.
He has a nice view inside the hotel room.
He gets to know only the neighbors in the same apartment building.
Yes, I'm going to unmute all.
I think you.
Now, try to unmute yourself, Vlada. Oh, now yes.
Now, yes, my friend, I wanted to tell you so much things and you mute me.
Gustavo,
Yes?
please allow open the waiting room.
Okay, I will.
Admit
Let me
all.
just see if Ike is already in the waiting room, and then I'll do it. Because I'm not seeing him here. Okay, now we'll be full. Our screen will be full.
Tem deitado ali.
Let me unmute the speakers.
Not all of them.
Okay, the speakers are unmuted.
Gustavo,
Yes?
I think Ahmed is here. There is a name
Okay.
Ahmed. But they are. Here it is.
Let me find him. Ike.
On the second page. Here it is.
Let me just take him with us. I have 2.
No, he's already there with. He's writing. Can you, the host, unmute me?
Yes.
Okay.
1 second. I can't find his name, Lukan.
You have
It's
it
like
in.
his full name?
You have it in the chat.
Yes.
In the chat.
I have 2 Ahmeds here. Let's see.
he's with the camera on, so
I think now, yes. That's it. Unmute. No, it's not going.
Yes, perfect.
Yes, hello, Ike. Welcome.
Listen, make sure you keep that guy Jordi muted, okay? Jordi Calzada. Don't let him out here, okay? I mean, he doesn't know it right now, but he's muted. Don't unmute him. Trust me.
Very bad influence. Very bad influence.
Yes, he's very bad influence. Very bad influence. We can't hear you, Jordi. I don't know what you're saying. You're probably saying you agree with us. So thank you.
Let me unmute him. No, he has to mute himself. I'm trying to.
I am here. I've missed you. Listen, but I was gonna say I still have fingers to communicate. Closed caption. By the way, just gonna tell. Are we open up? We need to celebrate. I just got money from the government to support my practice. This is a big deal. I'm really happy.
Congrats.
congrats.
When the Democrats and Republicans actually get together to do something, they actually do something good.
Well, good, but what is that new car doing outside? What is that about then?
Oh, that new car, I can tell you, is not mine anymore. Still doing okay?
Yeah, good to see everybody. We have looks like 100 people here. You're probably maxed out.
No,
Yeah.
no.
We have plus 300 in YouTube.
The capacity is 1,000 of the room, so it's getting,
Look and make a great capacity.
yeah. We have it, 1,000.
And what time are you starting at?
In 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, hope everyone is doing well. Hope you all are doing okay during this this time.
Is it Ramadan? I think.
It's Ramadan tomorrow, man. So I haven't had a chance to eat much because I've been on meetings and stuff. But I better start eating because tomorrow I'll be fasting. Yes.
Okay. Good news.
Okay, guys, can we start? Everybody set? Okay. So wherever in the world where you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. And I would like first my name is Gustavo Hüning, I'm from Brazil. I would like to welcome Professor Susana Teixeira from Portugal, our keynote speaker Ahmed from Canada, Professor Athanasios Nikolakopoulos from Greece, our friend and excellent Dr. Jorge Calzada from USA. From India, we have our friend Sourabh Patwardhan. From Romania, Dr. Adrian Gavanescu. From Argentina, we have two fellows, Gaston Gomez Caridi and Rodrigo Santos. From Serbia, Vladislav Džinić, and the organizer Catalina Dumitrescu from Romania, and the co-organizers, my friend Lukan Mishev from Bulgaria, and myself. Thank you all, and I don't want to steal your time, so I'll ask to our friend Catalina start talking about the mind of the surgeon. It will be a very interesting speaking.
I hope so. Do you hear me well?
Perfect.
Okay.
Go ahead,
thank you.
Catalina.
Thank you so much. Do you see my screen? It's okay.
Not yet. You
Not
have to
yet.
share it, please.
Now you see it?
Now, yes.
Okay. Let's go. In the operating room, as it is in life, the more you know, the less you fear. My brilliant colleagues tonight will tell you all the surgical details about one fear complication in cataract surgery. I want to do another thing. I want to prepare your mind into not fearing at all, if you are a resident or a beginner. I will take you on a journey, the journey of my mind in the world of surgery training. Just a moment. Sorry about that. Nu știu să trec pe următorul slide. Mă ajuți, te rog? Cum trec pe următorul slide? Când trebuie să trec următorul, cum fac? Ok. Sorry about that. Becoming a surgeon started years ago. As a resident, I received little surgical mentoring and no training in cataract surgery. Our superiors were very good surgeons, but they were very cautious. So myself and my colleagues were just assisting. I was very passionate about surgery, so I was heartbroken. I was always looking for a solution, and I didn't find one at that time. I was acknowledging that I have some natural talent because of the movement of my hand under the scope. Nevertheless, the mind was set. I cannot do cataract surgery, and unfortunately, I believed it. I found later an opportunity for cataract surgery training with even better anterior segment surgeons. They were good-hearted people and believed in the paid-for concept, but they were focused in academic or research or business mentoring and less in surgery mentoring. I was still feeling complications in the operating room, but I was very, very grateful that I can do surgery by myself. My mind was getting some kind of hope, and I thought to myself, maybe I will do it, but it will take a long, long time. No, ăsta vreau. Sorry about that. Și asta trebuie să se vadă. I'm so sorry. Like this. Sorry. The most important change in my mind was when I met my mentor. Even from the first day, I noticed two details that were different from every other surgeon that I've seen before. First was the movements of his hands were just like art, more art than surgery. And the second one was the silence, not necessarily exterior. I felt it inside. My mentor is an anterior segment surgeon with surgical retina abilities, so he does not fear any vitreoretinal complications. A more mature attitude developed in my mind from a childless I feel complications to complications will appear, and it is important to know how to manage them. For the first time in many years, I did not fear anymore. My mind switched like in a second. I can do cataract surgery. And an adventure of a lifetime just begun. The mentoring was complex and focused on surgery. It included training my motor skills, which was very exciting, stimulating my cognitive skills, which took me from critical thinking to more innovative thinking. But the most important part of my training was done on my mind, from simple encouraging me, rising self-confidence, building incredible courage, and inspiring teachings more profound, human profound, like empathy, generosity, modesty, loyalty, and kindness. Just a moment, sorry. I was the same person, but I developed very differently as a surgeon, but also as a human being when I was put under different trainings. I realized that the most important part of becoming a surgeon is to find a mentor. This personal story was very personal, wanted to be a gift. It's a gift of hope for every young ophthalmologist who is dreaming of becoming a surgeon and who is listening now. Yes, you can do it too. I strongly advise my young colleagues to find a mentor, and more than that, to find the right mentor. In the end, I kindly invite all of you to take a moment and analyze the reality in front of us. The future is in the hands of an explosive technology development. The competition for each and every one of us, it will not be another better surgeon. The competition will be a software, a robot, or artificial intelligence. This is the moment for both mentors and mentees to start preparing for that future. And now, because I prepared your mind for amazing surgery, I will leave you with one of the most brilliant surgeons of this world. Thank you.
Very good. Very good, Catalina. Can you stop sharing screen, please?
Sorry. Just a moment.
Uh-huh.
Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catalina. So the next one, according to the program, is myself. Let me just organize it here. So we will have it. I'll share my screen as well. PowerPoint. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. So let's start. Very well. So guys, welcome everyone. Let's start. Welcome everyone, my name is Gustavo Hüning, I am from Santa Maria, Brazil, and I'm going to talk specifically for people who are starting to operate, okay? So that's why the name is about my first posterior capsule rupture, and most important than what doing, it's knowing what not to do, okay? First of all, recommend you all, do not stop studying, okay? Because every surgeon should know the vitreous anatomy. On the left side, you have this drawing from Professor Ian Vorst, who sadly has already passed away, and he was one of the guys who have studied the most the vitreous body. You can see cisterns, and on the right side, you can see each part of the posterior capsule with which part it is attached to the vitreous, okay? Why is that important to know in the surgical anatomy? Depending where you have the rupture, the vitreous is gonna behave totally different. Next one. Tip, let's look at the desperate guy and the rational guy. Okay, what is the difference between them? You're gonna see that on the left side, we have a red cross because the guy removed the handpiece from the anterior chamber, and on the right side, you have the guy who didn't. And why the tip number 2 is do not remove the handpiece from the anterior chamber. Here you're gonna see it. What is very important? When you are drinking something in a straw, okay, you are lowering the pressure inside your mouth. So what's going to happen? The liquid is coming into your mouth. Same thing happens with the anterior chamber when you are doing a phaco and you have a capsular rupture. When you remove the handpiece, you lower the pressure inside it and the vitreous comes forward. That means everything in nature looks for a balance, and here we are having a pressoric balance, okay? Next tip. Number 3, do not keep the bottle high. Why am I telling this? Because if you have the bottle too high, you'll have too much BSS pressure, and it's going into the rupture. That will make, you can see on the right side, that the BSS will push the vitreous, okay, to the anterior chamber, and we want to avoid dealing with vitreous. Number 4, do not leave position 1. Don't stop irrigating with a lower pressure, because same thing. When you remove the handpiece, okay, you lower pressure, and if you stop irrigating at least a little bit, you're gonna also lower the pressure on the anterior chamber. It is really important here that you have to, in your mind, that you have to keep anterior chamber pressure. Number 5, it's not time to spare, guys, okay? So, really important. Tamponate the rupture with OVD or viscoelastic as much as you can or as much as you need, right? After you have done it, you check it, then you remove your handpiece, then you won't have vitreous coming to the anterior chamber. Have this very clear, okay? Be calm, be cold-blooded. Number 6, don't forget to stop and think. This is really important. Check the situation, use your brain. Check if you have a vitreous prolapse, where is the position and the size of the posterior capsular rupture. Then check, do you have any fragments? What's their size and how many do you have there? After you have checked these 3 things, last one, how am I personally, emotionally, and do I have the experience? If you have a green light for these 4 topics, then you might go ahead. Number 7, and this is a tip mainly for people who are starting, okay? Do not forget to suture the main incision, so you won't feel tempted to use it. Remember, if you work through the main incision, what's gonna happen? You're gonna lower the pressure from the anterior chamber and okay? It's together with tip number 7, not using. We did put this book cover, which in my opinion, every eye surgeon should know it, okay? It's called Eye Surgery. It was written by another colleague from Switzerland who has already passed away, sadly. And it talks about physics, vectors. It's an engineering point of view for eye surgeons. I really do recommend it, and you can find it in Google for a free download. Number 9, do not forget to use triamcinolone. People who say that they can see vitreous, don't believe them. I don't know anyone who has super eyes. If you leave any vitreous, you'll have a tilted IOL, you're gonna have risk of endophthalmitis, pupil will be open, high intraocular pressure, so avoid all these complications. Number 10, do not promote traction of the vitreous. In the past, when people didn't have vitrectomy or it was inaccessible for everyone, people used to use cotton swabs to traction vitreous and cut it. Don't do it anymore, please, okay? Because you're gonna have a retinal break, as we can see here in the red arrow. On the same time, if you're gonna make an anterior vitrectomy, and we're gonna have colleagues showing it, do it inside the capsular bag. Don't do it anteriorly because the vitreous likes to come forward. Remember that, okay? Number 11, don't make asterix and obelix fight for you because you're doing phaco in the vitreous cavity. If you have any nucleus fragment who has fallen into the vitreous cavity, stop and leave it for the retina surgeon. If you are an anterior segment surgeon, have some friend who does posterior segment, okay? And talk to him if he wants IOL or not. I personally prefer the people not putting the IOL because sometimes if the nucleus is too big or you have a big fragment, I prefer taking it out through the limbus, okay? It's a personal thing. Last but not least, in October, we're gonna have the TVRS course in Thessaloniki. You have the dates here, you can email me. And thank you all. You have any doubt, any question, please write me, email me, or look me in Instagram. Thank you so much. Very good. So next one, according to our program, it's gonna be our friend Lukan Mishev from Bulgaria. Lukan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Gustavo. Now, do you all see the screen?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, okay. Just a second. So, now this is a case. Routine surgery. The important thing was that the anterior rhexis is good one because I'm gonna need it later. And now the early spotting. If I broke the capsule here or here, or probably in the next moment, probably here. This is the beauty to have a recording of your video, then you can assess and see when that happened. This is my first mistake, that I go out without putting OVD inside. Now I will try to fix that. And the main thing here is to not allow pieces of cortex to go back. Now this is a vitrectomy, posterior vitrector with irrigation handpiece, which is put on the IV line for a vitrectomy. The machine is Constellation, and now I toggle between cutter on and cutter off in order to suck and pull and cut the cortex and the vitreous which is around the cortex. So as you see, these bubbles, I keep them as a sentinel bubbles to know that I have enough OVD to cover my endothelium. And as Gustavo said, the vitrectomy should be performed in the back in order to avoid vitreous prolapse. So gently, now you're only with vacuum, then you again cut. The idea is to use the vitrector as aspiration handpiece also, but in order to not pull vitreous simultaneously with the cortex, you need to obviously toggle between cutter on and off. Now I will meticulously clean the cortical material, and obviously I cannot repair the open posterior capsule. Now you see here the pulling maneuver. The next one probably will engage the capsule also, so you should avoid engaging the capsule edges, especially the anterior one, because you're gonna need it if you want to fixate the lens, no matter 3-piece IOL or any other design of IOL. And now here you can see how the vitrector will pull the capsule along with the cortex. So I abandon this approach here, I go for the opposite side, then I will switch my hands and clean the left part of the eye. The important thing is to not fish back or reach behind the capsule. And now, after putting an OVD, I will implant a synthesis lens, which is for haptic design. And I will fix the lens with diagonal haptic capture, which I published in iTube last week. The idea is to have both of the haptics on diagonal fashion behind the anterior Rhexis rim, and the other diagonal haptics above the Rhexis rim. So you will have perfectly stable fixation and actually Rhexis fixated IOL. Now, obviously with spatula and Lester manipulator is the one way to do it. And it's a little bit challenging, but micro graspers are really helpful because you can precisely guide where you put the haptics. Now I will check this haptic because it is not where it's supposed to be. And as I said, the most important thing is to have a good anterior Rhexis. And now you check for any remnant vitreous, if any, in the anterior chamber, and that's it, my case. Thank you.
Very good, Lukan. We have people on YouTube asking which type of OVD do you use?
Cohesive one. I always use cohesive one because I need a space maintaining device.
Okay. Anyone else use something different?
I prefer not to use a lot of viscoelastic. This is a common mistake everybody is using. They inject as much viscoelastic to save everything and to push it back. But remember that this viscoelastic might go through the hole if you inject too much and goes at the back of the eye. And that is creating a very high pressure the next day. So remember, the viscoelastic should not be more than enough to go behind the capsule and stay in the vitreous cavity because you're going to have a white eye next day.
Yeah.
Thank you, Athanasios.
I comment from Toronto. I would just add that whenever we think about viscoelastic, we need to think about the fluidic parameters that we're working within or around. And I think dispersive can, of course, be helpful to sequester and keep spaces, while cohesive can help to create space. But whatever we use, we need to also account for whatever fluidics we're using, whether it's with the vitrectomy device or the cortical removal or the phaco. For example, a flow rate that's too low, for example, with some vitrectomy settings, if you're doing this, may end up with the vitrectomy being occluded. So just be mindful of this, and adjusted parameters are important to ensure that you can adequately work around or even remove viscoelastic with the devices we use.
Thank you, Ike. So then our next speaker directly from Serbia, our friend Vladislav Džinić. Please, Vlada.
Hi, hello. I'm sharing the screen. Just a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
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 Good afternoon and good evening and good morning to all of the colleagues. I'm Dr. Džinić from Serbia, and my topic is the post-planar vitrectomy for the lens fragments. Posterior capsule rupture, it can happen to all of us. It cannot only happen to people who are not performing the surgery. What do we have to have in mind is the vitreous our friend or our enemy? Actually, it depends. Sometimes when it's quite solid, it can be of a great help when you have a posterior capsule rupture. He can save the fragments inside the bag. Otherwise, when it's quite liquid, it's not of a great help. Surgical approach to the posterior capsular rupture is, first of all, you should not worsen the situation. What you need to have in mind is there is a great risk of joint retinal tear and retinal detachment. We are supposed to clean as much as we can, but not to watch the vitreous carefully. And what is really important is that we never go for fishing. I mean, to put the phaco probe behind the posterior capsule. Phaco is designed to work in the capsular bag. We should close up the wound and check up for vitreous. Retained lens fragments, of course, small amount can be tolerated, but the big fragments will cause either uveitis or significant macular edema, glaucoma, and of course, the increased risk of retinal detachment. What are the decisions for doing the vitrectomy with retained fragments? Larger nuclear fragments should be evacuated, but the cortical lens material and the small fragments can be tolerated by the eye. But what we need to have in mind is that sometimes that it cannot be tolerated from the patient. So actually the individual approach is very important. What we do is that whenever we have a lens material inside the vitreous, we are performing the post-planar vitrectomy as soon as possible. The cortex and soft nucleus, we usually use the vitrectomy probe, and for the hard nuclei and the larger fragments, we use either bimanual vitrectomy with Bisoft technique, vitrectomy probe, or anterior chamber phaco or extracapsular extraction with the use of a help of a perfluorocarbon liquid. EOL implantation will depend on what do we have the leftovers of the capsular bag. We conducted our small study. We follow up 20 eyes. And what we found is the 1 retinal dialysis, 4 retinal detachment, and 1 IOL luxation. This is our first movie. The patient was referred to us that the small amount of the lens nuclei was dropped down. What we usually do, we're performing the vitrectomy by cleaning as much vitreous as we can to free up the particles of the lens in order to take it and to eat it by the vitrectomy probe. We usually put perfluorocarbon liquid in order to protect the posterior pole, but what we found in this patient is really a great amount of nucleus. Actually, it was only 1/4 of nucleus was emulsified. So as the wound was already widened, we decided to do the extra cap. You can see that it's really brown. It's like the Cataract nigra, and it's very, very sticky. So with the use of perfluorocarbon, which is the eye was filled with it, and we did the extra cap extraction. We can see that there is a leftovers of anterior capsules, so we performed the implantation at the anterior leftovers of the capsule. This is another case with the small particles of the lens. which also dropped down. So we used the vitrectomy probe. We clear up the lens material, and as the complete capsule or capsular bag was, we could not implant the lens inside, so we decided to remove it and use scleral fixation with 25 gauge needles. We made a small scleral pockets and put the IOL. This is another patient where we decided to do the phaco modification in the anterior chamber. It is the same principle. We perform complete vitrectomy and then fill up the eye with peripheral carbon liquid, and then use a combination of dispersive and cohesive viscoelastic and do like the shallow technique, do the phaco in anterior chamber. This is another case, so complete capsule is absent, so we decided to put the iris global lens inside the posterior to the iris in the posterior chamber. What do we need to have in mind that in our small study, we found that the visual acuity was mostly affected by the way how the anterior segment surgeon actually take care or deal with the complications of posterior capsule. So the take-home message we can say is the better leave than catch. You should always close and check the wound carefully for the presence of the vitreous. When you have large fragments inside the vitreous cavity, it's not a good idea to implant the lens, because Gustavo mentioned it already, the different way of how we can remove that leftovers of the lens or the nuclei. You should ask for a vitreoretinal consultant. And it's really important that you do not get the patient to enter the so-called circulus vitreosus. By that I mean you can perform the cataract surgery, you can have in mind that you have some fragments and nothing is going on. 3 days after, you will have increasement of intraocular pressure, and then you will have opaque cornea. Usually you will get the prolapse of the vitreous. If you close the wound, you can have the prolapse of the paracentesis. We very often see that. And then you cannot go for vitreoretinal surgery. You have to wait. So you will manage yourself with the opaque cornea, with vitreoretinal traction, with leftovers of the lens which are hitting, and you can do nothing. You can only wait with the patient who has a painful eye. So it's better to ask for the vitreoretinal consultant as the time that it's happened. I want to ask you, and I want to say that we are celebrating the 10 years of the Thessaloniki Vitreoretinal Summer School, and to invite you to join us at the last week of October. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Vlada. Please stop sharing the screen.
Just a second.
The next one is going to be our all professor, Athanasios Nikolakopoulos from Greece. Please, Professor, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organization of this meeting, which is fantastic. I never thought I would be able to participate with technology that is coming up to my mind. But let me see that we're going to the next step. Let me see my watch. So the next step, is you drop down a lot of things in the eye. The whole nucleus or the whole lens. Sometimes you don't even have time to think about it. And there's always the traumatic rupture of the ciliary procedure, and the whole thing is going down. So we developed something that we call the Bisoft technique, which is meaning bimanual soft. That means that we treat the eye as soft as possible. That's removing the dropped lens.
Athanasios, we are not seeing your screen, sorry.
You're not seeing my screen.
No, please share it.
Okay. I'm going just down with this. And share. Again.
Here we are.
I'm learning, and am I now in the position to show you my, can you see that?
Perfect. Go ahead.
So it's removing the drop lens and placing an endoscleral lens. That's the least harmful for the eye. And this is very important that we follow all these steps one by one. First of all, we're using only 23 or larger vitrectomy because 25 gauge is not good for very tough nucleus. The other thing that we evolved and doing a lot of things together, we found out that we should keep the forceps, 23 gauge forceps, by the guiding hand. The usual thing they do when you try to do a vitrectomy in a drop thing, that you go with your right hand to do the vitrectomy and with your left hand to push something into probe. But the real job is done by the right hand and the forceps. You definitely need a chandelier illumination in order to have a wide angle, non-contact observation system, which is going to give you the whole view, 120 degrees view. And what is the difference with the right hand forceps? The left hand is using mainly to suck the pieces into the probe and using the maximum suction and stay in the middle. And first, you lift the lens by the suction and very low cut rate, and then crossing in the center with the nucleus. So it's divide and conquer with 200 to 500 cuts per minute in order to keep the port open as long as possible. What are the new things about this? The first thing is that you need it by manual, definitely. The other is the forceps by better hand, and you see that on the video. The vitrectomy probe suction important. You're comfortable with us and doing every time. Never, but never touch a lens fragment on the retina surface. Because if you touch it, you're going to produce a hemorrhage, a tear, or displacement of the pigment epithelium. So another thing that is very new is that we never use heavy liquids. We don't suggest that, and I'll explain you why. This perfluorocarbon is not used by us. And this is the video, and you saw the whole lens of an old guy that got into the vitreous, and there's vitreous everywhere. So the first thing to do when you do these things is to remove everything that is called vitreous from the whole eye. And you go to the anterior chamber first, cleaning it, and of course we use Kenalog or Kenacork, whatever you call it, in order to have a complete removal of vitreous. When I say complete removal, I mean anterior, posterior, and everything that is had.
What?
Sorry?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So let's go a little faster. And you see at the end, you see the whole lens of an old guy dropped inside the eye. And it's attached to a lot of inflamed eye. It's an inflamed eye and it's attached a lot to the vitreous. And you have to remove everything around it. And now it comes the important thing. We go with the right hand, we lift with the left hand suction of the probe, and as soon as we engage it with the left hand suction, you see that it's free of vitreous around it, you see some cortical there. Then we use the right hand to press against the probe that we have. And then when we lose something, we just wait until it's get engaged again with the suction. And we try with the right hand, that is the useful hand, of course, to make it smaller bites for the 23 gauge suction that we use. So it's mainly, everything is happening in the middle of the vitreous. If you see that a lot of pieces now with this exhibition are throwing against the retina and they're hitting the retina. And there's no damage, no hemorrhage, no nothing happening. But if you try to get something from the retina, your pressure that is putting with your hand against against these pieces is going to be exceeding the retina tolerance, and you're going to have a bit of a problem. But if they hit by themselves, they don't produce any damage. So just wait in the middle, cut every little piece. You see this, it was a white lens. It was not a soft one. And you see every bits and piece. And we've done until now 150 cases by this. And at the end, that's the funny thing. You see that the cortical vitreous, although he has a drop lens and it has been a week or 2 weeks up before the surgery, is still attached. So with a cannulum, you can see that this attached vitreous can produce a little bit of trouble later on, because we know that all the macular problems are happening from cortical vitreous attachments that they are happening. So you don't finish it until you completely remove even the cortical vitreous. And it's very important to understand that it's not a natural thing for the vitreous to be liquefied every time. Now that we do surgery, we know that this is not true. It's not liquefied every time. Most of the time, a slim piece of vitreous is attached to the cortical retina. So you clean the eye and you see there is no damage from the hitting of the eye. The damage that is done with these globes. The next thing to do is to put a lens. And the easier way to do it is to put an endoscleral lens. And in order to put an endoscleral lens, to develop a technique which is much easier than for the newcomer, which is we just open the sclera 2 millimeters from 180 degrees. And then we make a big opening, not the smaller ones you have, and a 3-piece lens is inserted there. So you can grasp it with one hand and take it out. What is the benefit of making a big opening to those? And that's a 20 gauge stiletto that's getting in. The benefit is that these lenses are not made for endoscleral placement. They are made to be in the sulcus. So you cannot take these haptics and pull them and push them and pull them again. Because the most important thing that my fellows are having difficulties is when they bend one of those, or when they break one while they're doing it, and then the surgery becomes very big. If you have a big opening, you grasp it from the edge, actually the edge of the haptic, not anything else, and then you pull it out, and it's not bended in order to go out, because you have removed all the vitreous, and it's a big opening there, so you don't have that. And the second thing you have to know, and we do it in the wet labs every time, is the handshake technique, which is very important because you control the catching of the haptic of the other eye, and you pull it out from the 20 gauge. Remember that this stiletto used to be used for 20 gauge vitrectomies. So the opening you make is actually a 20 gauge vitrectomy opening on the sclera. And it has the benefit of you can then get the haptics that they are not embedded in the sclera and try to pull them up and down like driving a car in order to put it in the center. To centralize the lens is important because you never be exactly 180 degrees. So you grasp one hand and you grasp the other one and you just pull one and push the other instead of going inside and get the lens in the middle. So if you get the lens where you want to be, then you put a little bit of the tip of the haptic into the sclera and that's it. That's the end of this situation. And of course, you have to know that finally, it's a very easy way, and everybody can do that. And we do a lot of practice in Thessaloniki Vitreoretinal Summer School with this. If you see the picture, you see Hüning is teaching handheld handshake technique. And of course, you remember that these eyes that you have ruptured something, and you have to do something later, you have an anterior chamber hour lens. If you have a suture lens or iris globe lens, that the following a complicated cataract, the cornea is already decompensated due to endothelial cell loss. So the endoscleral lens is the lens that respecting very much the endothelium, and you don't destroy more of that. And these are the steps. And of course, you get a trauma case where you have this kind of situation. And this trauma case, we have to do it with retinal detachment, endoscleral lens, and an iris suturing. Even acris of the endosclera have been put when you have a retinal detachment, because then you have to inject gas. And if you inject gas in the eye, you have an endoscleral lens, if you have haptics, thin haptics, they break or they turn around. By the acris can bend and go around and doesn't need that. The least of the astigmatisms produced by endoscleral lenses. So successfully, we use it in 155 cases, 80% of the drop lenses without fragmentation at all, because we don't like fragmentation. And you see the results on the first days that we have this. The eye looks very comfortable the first day, and it's really post-traumatic endoscleral. And this is the conclusion that it's an endoscleral PC lens insertion, low placement in the closest to the less astigmatism, and removal of drop nucleus without any fragmentation, without any peripheral carbon, and all procedure in a closed and under surgical control eye microincisional surgery. You remember, the best thing to remember is that controlling the eye is your purpose and not the eye to control you. So controlling is the name of the game. A closed system is the best system you can use. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's an incredible gathering of people, and I'm looking forward to see what's coming next. Thank you.
Very good, Athanasios. Very good. Please, I'll stop your sharing here. Okay, thank you so much. We have two quick questions for you, Athanasios.
Yeah.
One of them is why using 23 gauge instead of fragmentom?
Well, I've seen a lot of people using fragmentom. Most of the fragmentoms are 19 gauge. And already when you do a surgery, you have an infusion of 23 gauge. So there's a discrepancy between 23 gauge infusion and 19 gauge suction. So when you go to the lens to do a fragmentom, you might go through the lens without understanding what you're doing. And then you find yourself with a fragmentom probe in the BSS area. And it doesn't understand that you are now in BSS, and the suction is becoming enormous, and 23 gauge infusion doesn't comply with that. And suddenly you have choroidal effusions happening. And I see with fragmentom people going very close to the eye, to the retina. And we know that fragmentom is not very benign for the retina. So if I can escape the fragmentom, of course, if I have a very hard lens that is not breaking by my system, by Bisoft, I'm using fragmentom. But even fragmentom has to be learned in a proper way to use it. It's not just like getting in and eating the lens. It's a balance between infusion and removal. And if you have 19 gauge and 23 gauge, you have to remember that the resection is much better than that.
Thank you so much. So while Dr. Sourabh Patwardhan from India prepares his lecture, I want to ask everyone who is not a speaker to turn your camera off because we are having some lag in the transmission. I would be really happy. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Gustavo, and thank you, Dr. Lukan, Dr. Gustavo, and Catalina for inviting me on this forum. And it's a great honor to present my topic here. So I'll be speaking about posterior capsule rupture and how can I put the IOL in the bag. So we already know that when there is a posterior capsule rupture, the three-piece IOL or a large optic non-foldable IOL sulcus is the rule. Then why do we want to take the risk and put the IOL in the bag? But in some situations, there are no other options. Like, for example, you are going to put a multifocal or EDOF, or there is a customized lens like toric, which we have to put. So in those cases, we have to put the lens in the bag, and that's the best position for these particular IOLs. So let's start thinking about how to put that. So in case of a posterior capsular rupture, we have to first think about what is the status of antihyaloid, whether it is intact or it is ruptured with vitreous loss. So in case there is intact antihyaloid, then we can, and the PC is enough, then we can place the IOL directly in the bag, and that's enough if the posterior capsule is, enough. And if there is a vitreous loss, then we have to do thorough vitrectomy, and then only we can place the IOL in the bag. Because even if you push some visco, that's what I see some young surgeons doing, push visco to put the vitreous back or sideways and then put the IOL in the back. But what happens later is that it starts decentering, even tilting. And also if the vitreous is trapped in the incision, it is going to give a lot of problems in the post-operative period. So we should avoid that and do always complete anti-vitrectomy and then proceed with the IOL implantation. So let's think, when the IOL is in the bag, what are the places which really require the support? So it is the haptic and the optic haptic junction. So if you see, the central part of the posterior capsule is actually not critical for IOL in the bag. So if that part is ruptured, for example here, we can easily place the IOL in the bag and put it 90 degrees If the rupture is say vertical, we can always rotate the IOL 90 degrees to that and put the haptics nicely in the equator with good support. In case there is a small peripheral rupture, we can place the haptics in such a way that it avoids those areas. But in case when there is the large peripheral rupture, say around more than 4 millimeters, in those cases, even if we put the IOL in the bag and on table, it might be stable. In the post-op period, because of gravity, eye movements, or capsular fibrosis, it is going to decenter. So it's best to avoid it in the large peripheral tears or those who are going into periphery. In such situation, there can be one more option of doing the optic capture. Now, 3-piece IOLs are the best suited IOLs for the optic capture. But of course, some IOL models do allow you to do optic capture. Now, for putting the IOL in the bag, there are some models of IOLs which are not really difficult because of its spring action, like the plate haptic models or the 3-piece IOLs. These are really difficult to put it in the bag if the posterior capsule is open because they work like a spring and they may stretch the posterior capsule more open. While these type of IOLs can be better suited in case there is a rain and then we want to put the IOL in the bag. So let's have a first case here. So there is a posterior capsular opening here, and my plan is to convert it into a posterior CCC. I want to show the mistake also here. See now that I am going to do a PCCC here. It's quite easy it's easier than what you think. So it's very easy, but only thing you have to do is maintain the anterior chamber well. So if the anterior hyaloid is bulging, like here, you can see the anterior hyaloid is bulging because the visco is leaking, then it's not a good sign. And usually it leads to the anterior hyaloid rupture, like in this case. So in this case, the anterior hyaloid opened up and there was vitreous loss. So naturally, I have to do complete vitrectomy, also taking care that the posterior capsule rupture doesn't open up much. So I have to be very careful with my movement of the vitrectomy probe. And first thing is the central vitrectomy, as I'm showing here. And after that, I have to clear the vitreous strands which are going into the incisions. So to clear the vitreous strands going into the incision, the movement which you have to follow is like this. You have to take your vitrectomy probe under the incisions, and as you come centrally, you have to start cutting with aspiration. As you can see here, the vitreous strands get cleared very easily. You can also watch the posterior capsular rents, the morphology, and you can see the edges. And from the edges, you know that there are some vitreous strands which are going into incision, like you can see here now. And once I cut it, the posterior capsular rent actually becomes smaller and smaller. So idea here is to clear the vitreous without enlarging the tear. So it is best to avoid going near the margins. And once you are sure of antivitrectomy, just check that there are no strands going into the incision. This is very, very, very important because if strands are remaining, they are going to cause problem later. And once that is done, I inject 2% methyl cellulose. That is my visco of choice because it is easy to wash later. Also, I think nice trick is to slightly enlarge the incision because many times after vitrectomy, the eye is a little hypotonous and it's easier to inject. Watch my left hand, how it is supporting the IOL while it is opening in the anterior chamber and not necessarily in the bag. Once it opens nicely in the anterior chamber, just rotate those haptics using Sinski or Kuglen hook and put them in the bag nicely here. I am sure there is no vitreous, but still I will again confirm using diluted triamcinolone just to be extra sure. And I use this technique of passive wash of viscoelastic device. This avoids any building of the pressure in the anterior chamber. And since I have used only methyl cellulose, it can wash off methyl cellulose really well in just 2 to 3 minutes, and the case is over. And the eye is really quiet in the post-operative period once you do the surgery in this manner without leaving any vitreous or any viscoelastic in the anterior chamber or in the vitreous. Now this is another case. There is not always need to convert a rent into a PCCC. Like here, the anterior hyaloid is really intact. There is no vitreous. So I am not trying to convert this into PCCC, but straight away I will be putting the IOL in the bag, and the same method I have used methyl cellulose to inflate the bag. So I will just do passive visco wash and using this jets of fluids to take out the methyl cellulose. if you have used a higher dispersive viscoelastic like Viscoat, then you may have to use active aspiration, but make sure that you are using very low bottle height. Now, here I want to just show you, see there is no PC rent by the end, but as you can see, I withdrew the probe, suddenly out of nowhere the PC rent opened up. But I want to show here, when I injected with methyl cellulose, nothing went into the vitreous. That indicates that the antihyaloid is intact, and it's a good sign because then your decisions may change how to approach that particular case. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Over to you, Gustav.
Okay, I can stop your transmission here. And thank you. And I want to listen from Ike Ahmed if he would do optic capture or use a 3-piece IOL. Please, Ike. Yes?
Oh, hi, I think I was muted there. Yeah, I like the ideas here. I mean, I certainly try to use the capsular bag if I can, and I agree that we need to have capsule support behind the haptics. You know, a one-piece lens can be optic capture, but if the capsule Rhexis is small, it can cause twisting of the haptics. So if you don't have to, I think a 3-piece lens is definitely very manageable to do an optic capture, and that's kind of been my typical course with the one-piece lenses as an exception to the rule.
Very good. Anyone else want to contribute? No? Are we shy today? Okay. Next one, it's gonna be, let me see in the program because I just lost it. I had it in front of me. After Sourabh, Professor Susana Teixeira from Portugal. She's a legend talking about ROP, pediatric surgery. Please, Professora, por favor.
Well, I like that about being a legend. God, I'm not a legend. So I'm sharing my presentation. Can you see the presentation, Gustavo?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Gustavo, for the invitation to speak in this virtual meeting. And I send a virtual kiss to all my friends here in the panel and all around the world. Well, I'm going to speak about posterior capsule in pediatric cataract surgery. And here we listen that the posterior capsule is our friend, but in pediatric cataract, no, the posterior capsule is our enemy. Because the aim of the surgery in pediatric cataract is to clear visual excess. And the pediatric cataract has some particular characteristics, that is a lot of inflammation. The eye of the child reacts with a lot of inflammation to cataract surgery, mainly if we insert an intraocular lens. Also, we fight with posterior capsule opacification, that it's a rule after this kind of surgery. And also anterior vitreous opacification. So here, the posterior capsule and the anterior vitreous are our enemies. So how do we deal with this? Our first enemy that I'm going to speak about is the posterior capsule. When we take the inside of the cataract, we still have epithelial cells behind the anterior capsule and in the equator that proliferate and make an opacification, or under the form of alginate pearls, or under the form of fibrosis, and make a complete opacification of this capsule. So the capsule is our first enemy. What should we do? We should make a primary posterior capsulotomy. So in the children, we go to the posterior capsule and make a hole in the posterior capsule. That's not what we want in the adult surgery, but that's what we want in the child's surgery. But we want to make a controlled hole. So we have a lot of techniques to do it. The most difficult and has a sharp learning curve is the continuous curvilinear capsular Rhexis. It's not easy, but it's very stable. But as the capsule in the children is very elastic, we can do this capsulotomy with the cutter, and at the end we still have a whole and very smooth capsulotomy with radio frequency, with diathermy, whatever. As the capsule is very elastic, at the end it seems like a posterior capsular rhexis curvilinear, but really the most smooth and stable capsular rhexis is the one that you can do with a rhexis. Now we have a hole, but we still have the cells inside the capsular bag. So in order to have a clear visual axis, we must rescue those cells, close those cells inside those capsular bag. So there is a lot of techniques to close those cells and avoid them to proliferate all over the anterior vitreous of the anterior vitreous. So you can have a posterior capture just of the optic. What do I mean? You put the lens inside the bag and just make a capture of the posterior optic. That's what I usually use. Or you can do a double capsular, double posterior optic capture. I mean, you put the haptics in the angle and capture in the anterior, and the posterior rhexis capture the posterior optic, posteriorly the optic. So you close completely the cells inside the bag, avoiding the proliferation to the anterior vitreous. So this technique, I mean, anterior posterior rhexis and the capture of the optic, allows you a perfect centration and prevent ossification, but mainly avoids the dislocation of the lens, because we are dealing with child. Child is never stopping. They fall down, they have trauma, and we need to be sure that the lens doesn't goes around and comes from the right and the proper place. So it prevents this dislocation of the intraocular lens, and also reduce the touch from the lens to the iris, so avoiding and diminishing the inflammation. The second enemy is the anterior vitreous, that can be a scaffold for inflammation and membranes. So there is a lot of still debate about doing or not doing anterior vitrectomy during this surgery. And the pros, of course, if we take the vitreous, that is completely linked with the posterior capsula, we avoid opacification, avoid proliferation. There are some cons that are just theoretical. Why? Because when we have inflammation in the anterior chamber, with or without vitrectomy, we have a channel that links to the retina and transport all the inflammation to the retina. So even without performing an anterior vitrectomy, we can have macular edema and inflammation in the vitreous. So I think, although it's controversial, I think that making an anterior vitrectomy helps avoiding the proliferation and frees the visual axis. More than speaking, let me show you a surgery. This surgery is just the posterior rhexis, and it is performed by one of the most gifted anterior surgeons that I know, that is Dr. Isabel Prieto, and is also the technique that I use. And as you can see here, let me take the sound. You see, it's very elastic and a little bit difficult to work, but most easy to make the posterior capsular rhexis than the anterior. The problem is the size. To have a precise size of capsular rhexis, that must be 1 millimeter less than the lens to allow a perfect capture of the optic. So the technique, it's not so difficult about the rhexis, but to measure really the size of the rhexis to allow a perfect capture, and it's not easy. So we put the lens in the bag, you can see here. And now we make the posterior capture of the lens. First down at the 6 o'clock, the inferior part. You see here, we go with the optic behind the posterior bag, and now the superior part. And you see that here, they testify that the optic is behind the posterior capsule. At the end, I always check if there is vitreous in the anterior chamber. And also this triancinolone, because I also don't believe that people have a special sight to see vitreous. Also, this triancinolone allows to control the inflammation after the surgery. So, as I said, the most difficult, not complication, but the most difficult step is to calculate really the size of the posterior capsulotomy. Now I'm just going to show you the difference between the behavior of anterior capsule, that it's very elastic, and while you are working, it widens the anterior capsule, so it's not easy. Has a difficult learning curve to make a very good anterior capsulotomy, and I show you here because it's interesting to know the difference and to feel the difference between how the anterior capsule behave differently from the posterior. So this is the anterior capsulotomy. Now I'm just going to put the vitreous. Normally the cataract, child cataract is, we just need to aspirate because it's not a hard nucleus. And that's my technique. Also, like Dr. Isabel Prieto, you make a hole in the posterior capsule. You push away the anterior hyaloid because you want to control the posterior capsulotomy. Perform the posterior capsulotomy without touching the anterior hyaloid. Of course, afterward, we do anterior vitrectomy, but it's controlled. I mean, I just take the vitreous I want to take. So this is a controlled posterior capsulotomy, and you see very well the anterior capsule and the posterior capsule. Now we make a vitrectomy of the anterior vitreous. Of course, we still don't have the right measure to make this anterior vitrectomy. Then we put the lens inside the bag. And make the posterior luxation of the lens, capture of the lens. So here we have, at least we try to maximize the cleanness of the axial of vision. Again, another eye, exactly the same, performing the same. So we did a bilateral surgery because at the same day. So it's a sequential surgery because the baby had a bilateral cataract. And here again, we do exactly the same. Again, put the lens in the bag, make a posterior capture of the optic. At the end, always check if there is any vitreous in the anterior chamber with the use of triancinolone. And the next day, as you can see, the next day the baby had this calm with no inflammation eye. Of course, for us that do vitrectomy, and I'm a vitreoretinal surgeon, sometimes we have to take the lens of the baby during the surgery. I mean, when we do stage 5 ROP, we must do what we call a lensectomy. And in this case, we take all the posterior capsule. So, as you can see here, in order to be able to reach the anterior part of the eye, you must do a lensectomy. So with the cutter, we cut the posterior capsule, aspirate all the cataract, but we leave the anterior capsule in order to make a secondary implantation if we want. So we do all the bad things to the posterior capsule voluntarily. I mean, we are the one who perform the capsulotomy, who take the posterior capsule in order to clear and maintain a clear axis for vision. So it's a completely different philosophy of the other kind of surgeries. We just use this also in trauma when we want to also take the posterior capsule and not want to have a scaffold. So pediatric cataract is completely different from the cataract in adults. So we must do always a posterior capsulotomy, whatever technique we use. Personally, I use anterior vitrectomy, but it's controversial. I mean, not everybody, not all the papers there are say that we must do anterior vitrectomy. But if we use several weapons to kill the same enemy, it's better. And we can do posterior capsulotomy wherever we can, the way we can cut with all the way we can. But I think the most stable capsulotomy is a primary posterior continuous capsular Rhexis. So that's my message to the cataract and to deal with posterior capsulotomy in cataract of children.
Very good, Susana. I think Jorge wants to ask you something. Jorge, you're on mute.
Dr. Teixeira, how are you doing? Quick question. How old, how young would you do primary implantation of intraocular lenses for babies?
Well, we tend to do primary implantations in younger age if you have unilateral cataract. So we try to make primary implantation at 4-6 months. It's safely to do at 6 months. Before, if the eye has some characteristics that allow us to make a primary implantation, there are some lenses that have less diameter, so they are suitable exactly to make this kind of implantation. If it is bilateral, sometimes we make an early surgery, but we make just implantation in a secondary surgery. So the earlier we implanted in our hospital, it's 4 months in the case.
Okay, I know there are people who also have experience with pediatric surgery and would like to ask you, what do you think? What would you do different? What would you like to add?
I will have a question for what do you think about the Bill IOL, the one that you put the anterior and posterior capsule inside that? I don't know how you say yet. I think I don't know the size of that lens, because that lens I know that it's not open used. I mean, you must ask for the lens. I don't have experience. I don't know really the size of the lens. The problem with these babies is the diameter of the lens. You cannot have an unusual regular lens. So from what I know, it's a big one lens. So I don't know if it's suitable for a baby lens, so for a baby eye. Now, it's an interesting philosophy, because it's the same thing. You close in the lens, you close the bag, so nothing comes to the axial my God, missed it. So you can have clear yes, you can have a clear sight, you know. I just don't know the diameter, the diameter of the lens, but the philosophy is interesting. It's not easy to use. It's very difficult, because if you don't have a precise diameter of the capsular Rhexis, anterior posterior, it's very difficult to put this lens. In children, you don't have absolutely precise diameter mainly in the anterior capsulotomy, because the anterior capsulotomy is so elastic that it enlarges more than you think. So it's very difficult to say that 6 millimeters and I do a 6 millimeters capsulotomy in the anterior part. So it would be interesting to use it, but I don't have experience and don't know if it is technically very predictable. Have I answered your question? That was my concern also about the predictability, because have no flanges, they have no haptics.
So any variation in the capsule Rhexis will leave you with a drop lens.
Yes, that's
Or
my plan.
maybe in the future when the kids are playing and all that, they may come out in the front of the eye or in the back of the eye. So
Another question from YouTube, Susana. They want to know, how do you calculate the IOL for a 6-month child?
Well, we do, of course, we don't, it's a calculation. We make a biometry with a portable, we make a keratometry with a portable keratometer. We make a biometry, and then we have an algorithm that at 6 months, I don't have here the algorithm, but we had +6. I mean, we leave the baby always with more hypermetropic in order to compensate the myopic shift of myopization of the baby. If I'm not wrong, at 6 months, you may leave a +8 diopter more than the calculation. Less than the calculation, sorry. So you leave the baby hypermetropic of 8.
Okay, and the last one before we, Lukan, ask please.
My question is also related to the calculation. Have you used the rule of sevens, which means that you add until 7 years of age and then you just leave the calculated diopter? And the second one is, what is your strategy for IOL exchange when the kids grow up? Because with double optic capture, I'm not sure that you can explant this lens without harming the capsule. So what is
No, it's impossible, yes. When you have the lens inside the bag, there is no problem, but most of the times you have fibrosis, but usually you can explant the lens opening the bag with viscoelastics, but most of the time, even without capture, it's very difficult to explant the lens because of the fibrosis. Sometimes we try to do it. Sometimes we cut the lens, we take the lens, and then you try, after cutting the lens, to take the optics. You understand me? So it's impossible to take everything. So cut the lens and leave the optics. Then try to take the optics, try to take the other optics. Sometimes they come, but it's very difficult because when you pull them, the zonula comes, and so between lefting them inside the bag and put another lens in the sulcus or taking them, sometimes we leave them. We always try to take them, but sometimes we must leave them. It's more traumatic to take them than to leave them. As they are inside the bag, they don't hurt the ciliary body, they don't hurt anything, so I think they don't leave any kind of inflammation. But always try to take everything.
Very good. Thank you. We are late in schedule. Next one, our friend from Romania, Adrian Gavanescu. Great lecture, Susana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg.
okay, do you see my screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Dear colleagues, this is a case of a planned vitrectomy for heavy syncytial scintillans, and combined with the posterior cataract. I do a stop and chop technique. This is a procedure done with the Constellation phaco machine, vitrectomy and phaco machine. And I usually have the parameters on like 650 vacuum here, which is pretty high, especially proved to be high in this case when instead of taking out the cortex and epinucleus at the end of the phacoemulsification, I choose to do it earlier, and that proved to be not such a great move. And having this high parameters, I usually keep the chopper underneath the phaco probe, which in this case I didn't do it. So one thing, and you see here the vitreous and the scintillance that is very disturbed when the PC rent occur. Very important not to take out the phaco probe when this incidents happened, and when we inject the viscoelastic, it's good to just inject it in a sweeping manner, so the viscoelastic is pushing any type of strands of vitreous that might come into the bag and anterior chamber to be pushed back by the viscoelastic, and it's good to go with the viscoelastic needle underneath the phaco probe in a sweeping manner, so we disengage any strands of vitreous that might got cut into the phaco tip. I have the switch on and off at the pedal, switch pedal, and I can activate and deactivate the cutting mode on this vitro cutter. So I can use it here without cutting mode, just aspiration as an IA probe, and take out the cortex remnants from the bag into the middle safe zone, and then activate the cutting mode to just activate and cut the cortex in a quick manner. That will fasten your surgery very much. I supplemented the subconjunctival anesthesia at the trocar level, and injecting the IOL on top of the iris here first, and then gently maneuver it inside the bag. First the leading haptic, you can see that is going nicely underneath the capsular Rhexis rim, and then slowly, gently maneuver the IOL, the optic inside the bag, by twisting a little bit the trailing haptic that can be placed also inside the bag and nicely centered. So we can see that even in this challenging of fissure occur, we can still manage the case nicely and have the IOL inside the bag at the end of the surgery, and everything can back to normal. Thank you for your attention. I hope this will help in your practice also.
Yeah, so the video was edited to make it as short as possible. At the end, I was using triamcinolone to check for any kind of vitreous strains and all that, and close the case.
Very good. I have a question for you, Adrian. Why did you put the trocars before the phaco? What's your opinion?
I was the patient was bothered by that hyaloid. So I plan to take out that also at the end of the phaco emulsification. I didn't plan to do a PC rent, but having the trocars there helped me out just good, and I did the anterior vitrectomy to the trocar, and it was much easier.
Perfect, very good. So next one, it would be Jorge, but I cannot see it. So let's go ahead. We are having now my good friends Gaston Gomez Caride and Rodrigo Santos from Argentina, who will present phacoretinal nightmares. Guys, you are the ones. Let me unmute you. Let me see. Unmute it. Try to. Now, yes?
Okay, now, yes.
Yes.
I'm going to share my screen. Okay, let's begin. Thank you, Gustavo. Now we are going to show you some short videos about complications of anterior segment, and we will try to leave a short and clear message on what we do in an event of an unwanted complication. So let's start with the of the complications of surgery, there is some kind of anarchy. We always have some weak arguments, and most of them are based on in our personal experience, without or with little scientific support, and the literature doesn't fit in every case. Many times we underestimate the case, like in this eye, with a hard rock cataract, sonular weakness, phacodonesis, that was planned as a standard phaco procedure. So we should consider peribulbar anesthesia for some problematic eyes, book extra time for such cases, have backup IOLs available, and think that the complications can occur and be prepared. Be aware that every procedure can go through the wrong way, but you can recognize special situations like cases with sonular weakness, posterior pressure, pathologic cataracts, and etc., and take some special precaution for that cases.
We have to be prepared. Our staff have to be trained for the unwanted events. We have to have at hand specific instruments like the complication to books, the vitrectomy kits, and our staff and my person have to know the settings of the machines. Also, we have to recognize the complication like pupillary changes, changes in the AC depth, changes in the fluidics, tilt of nucleus or fragments. And remember that the steps during a posterior, during a complication, are like a domino effect. You start with a small posterior rupture that causes vitreous prolapse, vitreous incisions, and fragment penetration. What we should try to do? Don't make it worse. Avoid vitreous tractions, avoid hypotonic, protect tissue damage, avoid collateral damage, and leave the anterior segment clean and as healthy as possible. Or, in summary, you have to stop the domino effect.
So, is always posterior vitrectomy necessary? I only would say that vitreous belong to the posterior segment. So, in an event of a complication with vitreous prolapse, I recommend the pars plan approach because vitreous follow a pressure gradient. We minimize vitreous space traction, we take vitreous back home, and we minimize intraocular tissue damage. People love to argue, especially when they have to face an unexpected situation. We as surgeons love to be in our comfort zone. Being outside that makes us feel some fear, but if we learn or acquire new skills, we are going to grow up as surgeons.
In an event of posterior capsular rupture with or without migrations, you have to put a suture stit, use pars plan infusion, think in a second cannula, think in a vitreous cutter as INA, mix approach anterior and posterior, and stop putting OB. Also, the settings have to be low IOP, linear vacuum, maximum cut rate, and get used with your foot pedal, especially with cut on and cut off. Putting the trocar cannula system is tricky, but it's not difficult. The secret is to increase the eye pressure and to use new trocars. If a fragment migrates, practice let it go. Remember, don't make it worse. Avoid collateral damage. Leave the anterior segment clean and as healthy as possible. Respect your to put or not to put. If nucleus or fragments drop, we prefer a FAC. But if you decide to put one, leave an anterior segment clean and free of vitreous, and put it please in the right place, not as we observe in this video.
Here's another case of IOL in the wrong place. Look that you have a good Rhexis, but the election was a single-piece IOL that is not designed for the surgery. In cases with insufficient capsular support, we recommend to get familiar with one or two techniques, select the right IOL, and remember to put a post-plan infusion in vitrectomized eyes. Here's one eye with insufficient capsular support. Indeed, if you have no capsula, we elect to do a Yamane technique. We put a post-plan infusion and a regular technique. So in summary, bad postoperative visual acuity in the presence of a posterior capsular break is not because of vitreous loss, but it's because of the associated complications. As we know, cystoid macular edema, retinal detachment or retinal breaks, changes in IOP, intraocular tissue damage, or an unstable IOL. If we anticipate the complications with a coherent strategy, we are more prone to arrive to a happy end. We as surgeons can always acquire new skills that at the end of the day are going to improve our handicap. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good, guys. Anyone wants to share any opinion, to say something? Are we good? Okay.
What kind of haptics they have the three-piece IOL that you use? They are PMMA or the scleral fixation with Yamane technique?
No, MA60 from Malcolm. It's acrylic with PMA optics.
PMMA, okay.
Yes.
Perfect, very good. Our next speaker is going to be from Southern USA, Jorge Calzada. Please, you are the owner of the screen, Jorge.
How are you guys doing? Thanks for the invitation. Great presentations. As I'm looking over here, I'm going to talk about posterior. Sorry, let me put this on, move you guys out of the way, and then I can come in here. Perfect. Can you see me now? So I'm going to be talking about siliconal cataracts. This is one of the complications or one of the problems that we have to face whenever we have post-vitrectomy situations. And I think we've discussed in previous webinars how there's different approaches to this issue in terms of the approach of whether you do primary repair of removal of silicone or phaco-vitrectomies. But ultimately, there are patients like this patient that had vitrectomy surgery with silicone implantation, and they, for one reason or the other, come later with a cataract like this, a white cataract, no view of the fundus, and you have to approach the situation. And recognizing that silicone creates multiple issues, both from the surgical perspective as well as from the retinal visualization perspective, that need to be addressed. Whenever we have these patients, I think it's always important to recognize that the most important thing of the patient to deal with this situation is the retina. The cataract is in the way, but if the patient had silicone oil implanted in the first place, then there was a reason for that, and that will likely be the limiting factor to the vision. So when a phaco is going to be performed on a silicone oil filled eye, some things that we need to remember. Number one, there's positive pressure. What is this? So I have this vinaigrette here to remind you guys how oil floats above vinegar. So when you have an oil-filled vitreous cavity, the oil will float and put positive pressure on the posterior lens capsule, and the capsule will bow anteriorly when the nucleus is removed. The other thing is that when the phaco is being performed, you have to pretty much expect that there are going to be small bubbles of silicone oil that are going to migrate through intact sonules into the anterior chamber. And the best approach for that is to just proceed with surgery like normal. If you're going to proceed with these phacos in the standard phaco approach, some recommendations I have. Number one is use a tight wound and be very careful with the wound construction, because what you don't want to have is fluid migrating or exiting the wound and then loosen your anterior chamber control. So you want to have a tight anterior chamber control. Elevate the infusion pressure to counteract this buoyancy of the oil. As I said, don't worry as much about small oil bubbles. Now, we've been talking today about capsular tears. If you have a capsular tear in a patient with silicone oil filled eye, that is a big, big problem. Because it's not just about the tear or even about migration of the lens fragments, is how oil will come into the anterior segment. And as it does it, it'll make it very, very difficult to finish a phaco, to remove the lens fragments, and basically to think about implanting an intraocular lens when a lens capsule has been torn in a silicone oil filled eye. So how to approach the situations, I'll talk about it in a second, but since we're talking about this, I'll say that if I'm doing the phaco, probably what I'll do is at that point, I'll switch to a full 3-part splenectomy with 3 ports, remove the silicone oil, and then I'll be able to access the pieces whether they're around the lens or on the vitreous cavity. But if it's an anterior segment surgeon that's not comfortable with dealing with this issue, sometimes the best thing to do is leave the patient aphakic, put a suture on the wound, and get out and call a retina surgeon to get involved. But recognizing that if you leave a patient aphakic with silicone oil, you have to worry about silicone oil glaucoma. So an inferior peripheral iridectomy is required. Inferior because the oil floats when the patient is upright and allows the flow of the aqueous through that iridectomy. So this is an MRI of a patient with silicone oil on this left eye. You can see here, that's the meniscus, and there's a little bit of fluid underneath it. But as we go through it, remember that the silicone oil, as I said, floats. Some issues that'll also have will be its tendency to emulsify or break into small bubbles. And this is dependent on these biosurfactants. And this is silicone oil emulsification, which is very common on chronic filled eyes with silicone oil, and particularly when you're doing a cataract surgery, phaco emulsification of these patients. You have 2 things to recognize. Number one is this will come up to the front when the patient is supine because it floats. And second, if you have a little bit of emulsification in the anterior chamber, this is not a little, this is a lot, you have emulsification in the vitreous cavity as well that needs to be addressed. Sometimes emulsification will look like this. This is a complete fill of very small bubbles of foam of silicone oil in the anterior chamber. And this requires a significant approach on how to do this. And it's not just simply an anterior segment approach. You have to remove the silicone oil to deal with the situation, basically come in from that perspective. Hold on a second, this got stuck here. So regarding silicone oil, a couple of things. Remember the silicone consequences, the refractive consequences of silicone oil. I'm not going to go into the mathematics of it, but a retina surgeon does know about refractive changes. But I will say that, right over here, that silicone oil has a different refractive index than vitreous. And what it does is it decreases the refractive power of the posterior surface of the intraocular lens, usually by about a third. So about a third, not of the total lens power, but of the posterior refractive power of the lens. So you have the effect of the shape of the oil bubble in addition to the refractive index, because there's a wedge of silicone oil behind the intraocular lens, and the shape of the bubble changes with movement and position. For example, as you see here, this is how a standard silicone oil bubble would look when it's flat against the intraocular lens surface. But if you have a small bubble, you have a wedge of aqueous that's going to form in there. And as the oil bubble moves, it's going to create a problem. So it goes beyond the selection of the power, but also how the oil itself has refractive consequences, as I said right there. The other part that needs to be concerned is the interaction of silicone oil with the intraocular lens implant. So you do not want to put a silicone lens implant on an eye with silicone oil, because it'll create these bubbles that sometimes you can clean them intraoperatively, but most of the times it's very difficult and it requires intraocular lens exchange. So you want to use usually an acrylic would be a good way of dealing with it. Second thing is, these patients develop capsular opacity even before the cataract surgery has been performed. This is a photo taken on post-op day 1 of a cataract surgery on an eye with silicone oil, chronic silicone oil. So as you can see, you have this capsular fibrosis already present on post-op day 1. So this is not something that you can remove and clean with polishing at the end of the cataract surgery. So my approach to this is leave it be, put the lens implant, deal with it secondarily. And how do we deal with it secondarily? It's usually with a YAG laser. Sometimes you have to go to surgery and do a capsulectomy from the posterior approach. But if you're going to do, and I recommend that you try with the YAG laser first. When you have a silicone oral filling the vitreous cavity, and you have these thick capsular opacities, you can still perform a YAG laser, but it requires what I consider the sculptor technique, where you have to do small little dots of the YAG laser all the way around. Because remember, the oil will dampen the acoustic wave of the YAG laser. So instead of having big rips on the capsule, you have these tiny little holes that you have to basically put together. Oftentimes, this capsule will remain stuck to the intraocular lens. So I have to do a few little spots at the edges, create some bubbles, so that secondarily, usually takes about a week or two for that capsule to migrate inferiorly. But recognizing that, the anterior segment surgeon is thinking how to fix this. Me as a retina surgeon in this situation, I'm thinking, I can't tell what's happening behind this capsule. I cannot see the retina, I cannot see the macula. I need to do that before I can address the other situation. And for the sake of time, I'll stop right here. I will say a couple of things about dropped fragments for 30 seconds. My personal approach is a very simple one. I don't use forceps. I use 25 gauge. I do not use PFO. I think that perhaps with lenses in the United States are a little bit easier, but I think I only use a frag in about 20% of the patients. And I agree with Dr. Athanasios that when you have 25 or 23 gauge infusion with a larger bore, you have to be very careful at only aspirating when the port is closed by the piece of nucleus so that you don't collapse the whole eye. I'll leave it there if there's any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. Amazing. Anyone wants to make some questions? So far, we have nothing here in YouTube. And okay, so Jorge, amazing. Yes? Last but not least, our friend Ike.
Thank you very much.
Sorry? Yes.
It's great to speak after the retinal surgeons speak, especially Jordi. So thank you for having me here. I'm going to just speak about some management strategies for PC Reds. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully this will all work for you, optimizing my screen. And over the years, I've had a chance to had a lot of experience with PCRs, whether my own or with my trainees. So I wanted to share with you a few of these issues, of course, and most of all, I will try to refrain from swearing because the audio has been muted. So I guess my first question is what is worse than having a PCR? Well, I'll just play this next video here just to show you. So when you're alarmed and you're worried and you're like, damn, I got a PCR, just remember this video. This is not a PCR, but this is perhaps maybe what is much worse than a PCR, which is the surgeon's attempt at phacoing the capsular bag. And I think you can see what's happening, of course, on the video here, that there's no PCR, so that's great, but there's no bag either. So worse things can happen, and don't feel down. Yeah, you can certainly say that, or I did at least when I saw that. Now, I'm gonna play this next video, basically, which is a surgeon who's doing a nice deep groove, and I often tell the residents, like, make sure your groove is deep enough, but oh, that looks pretty deep there. That looks like a pretty deep groove. It looks like it's, there's no more lens material present between the probe and the capsular bag. But what do you do here? Well, we don't know whether the capsule is open or not, but certainly the suspicion is raised, at least watching the video, maybe not at the time. And the surgeon is basically splitting the lens and cracking as they normally would. This is probably one case where it won't be too much of a problem because of how deep that trench was. And as you look at this now, and I'll admit, probably watching on video is easier to see than the surgeon itself, but you can already see that the lens fragments, the crack is pretty wide. That's a pretty wide gape there. And that's not normal to see that large space between the two heminuclei. The groove wasn't that thick and wide. But of course, usually what happens in the middle of the moment, it's like, maybe I just pushed the piece over a bit and that's why I can't see it. But you can start seeing, of course, in your view that the posterior capsule, you can see that probably that tear present there toward the lower part of your screen. The surgeon did, I think, do the right thing and come out and put viscoelastic in and take a look now with OVD. And the question is, what do you do now when you have this opening present? Well, The question, of course, is there any vitreous present or not? And that's obviously a very important question. The chamber is maintained at all times and viscoelastic has been put in, and so the risk of this is less. Bringing the fragments up will help us to remove the lens fragments, and I think these are cases where they have to be brought into the AC no matter what. One can then deliver them either extra cap or phaco. Using a couple of instruments can be helpful, like a chopstick maneuver to bring these fragments up into the AC. And we do want to use enough viscoelastic, typically dispersive, to help to keep a bed of visco underneath the nuclear fragments. And then setting the machine up so you have lower bottle height, lower flow, but still maintaining a good aspiration and vacuum level to allow us to emulsify the nuclear fragments in their entirety without chopping them, which is supported by a blunt spatula, or one can use a modified phaco glide or even a lens as a scaffold, are options. And again, we're working under viscoelastics. There's no question there can be a debate about whether there's vitreous or not, and one can go in there and inject. So the question may come up, why not inject triamcinolone? Well, the problem with triamcinolone is, at least if you have viscoelastic in the eye, it's not going to go anywhere. Triamcinolone will work, of course, if there's vitreous and there's aqueous mixed in there, and the triamcinolone adheres to the vitreous. But when there's viscoelastic in the eye and it's filled with OVD, it doesn't really quite do that. Of course, one could go in with the vitreous cutter and start doing vitrectomy and do all that and try to be sure about it. That's possible. But with these nuclear fragments and with the chamber depth maintained at all times, we felt that the vitreous prolapse risk was minimal, and there are subtle cues we tried looking at, for example, sweeping the iris area and sweeping around the wounds or looking at the wounds to be sure of that. And I'm sure this can be considerable, this can be debated. But nevertheless, you can see, still you can even see the viscoelastic. Look at the viscoelastic you can see behind the spatula. You can actually see the fracture lines of the viscoelastic, which give us some optimism that there's some protection. And even before coming out, very important to keep the chamber formed. At this point, there's a pretty large capsular break, and I think here using the vitreous cutter, like a bimanual IA, and also, of course, doing vitrectomy at this point would be prudent. There is some lens material still present, so we do, as opposed to a VR surgeon, where you saw previous videos, VR surgeons don't really care if the fragments fall back. We do care, of course, because we're not really that comfortable going back after them, nor should we. But at the same time, as we heard earlier, we don't want to be fishing for them. So there's a fine line between this, and I think when the fragments are present at the capsular plane or just in the anterior vitreous, as you saw there, I think if you've done some vitrectomy now and removed them, I think it's fair to do that. And then, of course, using the vitreous cutter to remove cortex, I think, is very handy. One of the mistakes I see surgeons make in PC openings are that they leave cortex behind because they're in a rush and they're worried, and that just is a sitting duck for CME and inflammation, which these patients are at risk for. And there's the eye well going in. I think this case is perfectly reasonable to put a 3-piece lens in the sulcus and optic capture the lens through the open capsulotomy. Again, important, as you heard earlier, to keep the capsular integrity intact to allow for a good optic capture, which I think is a great position for a lens. And triamcinolone has been left, some of it's left in the vitreous cavity, and we typically put them on some medications afterwards for glaucoma. Just to show a quick video of this case where there was a PC rent. Sorry about the quality of this video. It was one of our other centers. It's actually an academic center. I hate to say that. Sometimes the academic centers don't have as good video. And you see there's a PC rent. And just to show you here, if the lens material is not huge, one can certainly place a 3-piece lens as this IOL scaffold in the sulcus. And this basically acts like an artificial posterior capsule in essence, and it can protect from lens material falling back. So I think this is a good approach for when there's hemisection or less of nucleus left, and even more maybe you could argue. It is important when we're doing this to try to suture that wound if it's going to be too large, and then you can see nicely how it can be emulsified on top of that IOL. This is, of course, always a problem at the end when there's post-occlusion surge, and one can see that during the last fragment removal, there's an open capsule present. We've already heard earlier the role of a posterior capsular Rhexis. It's not necessary, but it's nice to be able to do it because it allows us more comfort placing a lens in the capsular bag. And of course, it's just particularly prudent if we're deciding to use a 1-piece lens, which many lens designs are made, of course, whether it's a toric or otherwise. And I think what really helps us is not to overdo the viscoelastic, put enough behind the posterior capsule, and then use a microforceps to do the capsule Rhexis. I'm sorry, this is really laggy here for whatever reason. And then at that point, once the posterior Rhexis is made, one can go ahead and do our triamcinolone vitrectomy. I do think it's nice to do a posterior Rhexis before doing a big vitrectomy, because during the infusion of the irrigation and all the manipulation, that rent can potentially expand and get larger. And doing a posterior Rhexis, even if there's some vitreous around, it's under such low flow conditions that if you're careful, hopefully you can do it under and over OVD and viscoelastic. So that's just some things to consider. And again, I think it's great to be able to use the vitrectomy, bimanual vitrectomy. Most of our machines now on the anterior segment side are 23 gauge bore, and so they work quite well through a couple of paracentesis, and avoiding the main incision, I think, is a very important pearl. And I know we're not talking about vitrectomy so much, but I do want to make sure that we emphasize the importance of vitreous management and understanding the settings. And the settings are so important to maximize and understand, what the right cut rate should be, flow, vacuum, and everything else. For our purposes, we're not vitrectomizing near the retina. We basically want to, get in and out as fast as we can, but complete to make sure the vitreous is clear of the anterior segment. So those are just some pearls in managing PC openings and PC rents in different scenarios.
Very good, Ike. We have one question. People want to know if you use 23 gauge vitrector. Oh, you are muted. 1 second. Unmute. Now?
So yeah, I mean, our machine are 23 gauge vitrectors, and most anterior segment machines, phaco machines, have 23 or even smaller gauge instrumentation. So I think that is the way to go. I don't typically make a pars plana incision when I have a PC rent. I feel I can manage it through the limbus. I think most surgeons are doing it that way. That being said, I think some anterior segment surgeons may decide to work through the pars depending on their comfort level and their instrumentation for perhaps pre-existing vitreous prolapse or IOL complex cases. So, that's what I would say. I think there's questions about multifocal lenses. I don't know. I think multifocal lenses, I do use them, but I mean, in these complex situations, unless it's a small rent and I can get in the capsular bag, I'm not overly keen on using multifocal lenses here. You've got to be well-centered. You've got to have a good capsule support. You want to avoid tilt and all these things. So I'm a little bit cautious. I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible, and I have done it, but I think it's more of the exception. And I think that the question about why not convert to extra cap? Sure. I mean, I've done it a number of times. Rather than phacoing and risk the material falling back or phacoing under the cornea, one can enlarge the incision and do a mini nuke or some sort of small incision extra cap. And especially if the lens is already cut in half, I think it's perfectly reasonable to do that. I mean, why not as an option? But I think it depends on the lens density, the corneal status, and your comfort level with the lens material staying in the anterior chamber, and that may be helped with a spatula or with an IOL scaffold.
Other questions, please? Athanasios, you're unmuted. You have to unmute yourself.
Do you prefer to do a scleral tunnel to take out the nucleus, or just enlarging the phaco incision?
I've done both. I think it does make a lot of sense to consider making a scleral tunnel, opening up conj, and maybe moving superiorly and doing that. I guess it probably depends on how big an incision I need. Like if there's a hemisection, I think a corneal incision enlarged to 6 millimeters is okay. But if it's a big, dense nucleus, then I think, yeah, scleral incision would make sense.
1 second, Athanasios, we cannot listen to you. You have to unmute yourself.
Well, I'm doing that. They say you mute me again. So you know me better. And I would like to say that I saw something very interesting that he's doing, as usually. They used to use the side ports with 23 gauge to use them as an infusion aspiration system. That means you have enough in the vitrectomy machines and the cutter machine now that we have. You can change from cutter to aspiration only. So if you find some big pieces, and it's very, very important to remove all the cortex. It was very important to place the lens. If you have a cortex, you cannot place the lens. You have a displaced lens. So you can get into the side ports as you show us, and you can use just aspiration when you don't have vitreous. When you have a vitreous and combined with cortex, you can use a cutter, slow cutter. And so you can remove everything around. It's like an infusion aspiration system that we used to have in the old days. So it's an excellent presentation. The other thing is people say that sometimes some pieces, if they fell into the eye, it's okay if they don't produce any glaucoma, if they don't produce any visual impairment, it's okay. But you have to remember that something you very well said also by you, that the macular edema, it's there. And when you leave things in the eye, sooner or later you have a chronic macular edema that's going to diminish the vision. So I don't believe that we should leave anything inside the eye, even if it's not visible. And the last, when you are a vitrectomy guy like we are, I think I much prefer to drop the lens into the back of the eye and leave the endothelium free. And that's my fear, the endothelium, not the back of the eye. So when I was in Hawaii in ASRS once, I presented a case with a Fuchs syndrome, how to do a Fuchs syndrome. The one eye is lost already, and I did a capsule Rhexis at the back of the eye, and I did an anterior capsule Rhexis, and I dropped the nucleus inside the eye, where I removed the nucleus from inside the eye, and I put a sulcus lens on that. And Kid Paco went up and said, "You're a killer. You're dropping the." But that's the point. We have a clear cornea for that. So you have to remember, we feel very comfortable working, as you saw in my video, at the back of the eye. So we don't like to work in the anterior chamber. But if you have to work in the anterior chamber, now the new machines have very good cutters. You don't need to change to the posterior. You can do it in the anterior chamber because they have very nice 23 gauge cutter. The old 20 gauge cutter they have, they're horrible. They were sucking without cutting. So now that you can go to the side ports, and you see, you got three aspects of what we're doing immediately, and you show them as pearls. And I really appreciate that. And we'd like to have you in Thessaloniki someday, if you can drive from Canada to Thessaloniki, because flying, it's out of the question for the time being. And thank you for being with us.
No, thank you. We'll make it a plan to get there for sure. And you make great points. And I think, you know, we can turn the cutter off and on our machines. I mean, I know it's not a big deal, but it's very handy to be able to do that, to go between vitrectomy and removing cortex, as you've mentioned. And so you make great points. I think it's funny because, you know, our comfort levels in the anterior segment, while yours is the whole eye in the posterior segment. So I think your approach of a planned drop lens may be a novel technique to save the cornea. I have to think about that one.
Yeah, okay. It's a fun thing that we can do.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question from YouTube. What late complications you think might occur if you leave vitreous in the anterior chamber with PCIOL in the back?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't like that idea for many reasons. That being said, we've all seen cases where we had vitreous in the AC and a patient who had cataract surgery many years ago, and the eye seems to be fine. So it's a matter of tolerability, and I think that you know, our goal should always be to remove every vitreous strand in the AC, no matter what, and we should be double checking and triple checking with triamcinolone and everything else at the end of the case. I think the question is, if the patient is seen post-operatively and there's a vitreous strand, what do you do? The first thing I look at is see if there's any traction. If there's traction attachments to the wound or to the iris, I think it's important to release it because that is a risk for CME and or retinal traction. So in those cases, I think an early laser to cut the strand, I think, is worthwhile. Of course, if you have a blob of vitreous in the AC, you can't really yag it, you can't really cut it, and you have to decide what to do. Vitreous has been shown to be damaging to the corneal endothelium, has been shown to cause glaucoma, and certainly we know, of course, CME risk and IOL decentration, as well as our retinal attachment. So all those things can happen, and I have a good discussion about dealing with it. If it's a large amount in the anterior chamber, I think it's a potential risk, and I prefer to deal with it and manage it surgically.
Excellent, and I'll use you since you're a glaucoma surgeon, and we have lots of other surgeons very experienced here. I'll bring a case of mine from this week. I have the patient last week who had a PCR, and she came day one with the IOL in the vitreous. I did a vitrectomy, I did secondary IOL implantation. I used the hashtag technique from Samuel Nasket, and She is fine, but the pressure is still 28. She has a rhidotomy and everything else. What would you like, what would you guys look for in this situation?
Well, I don't want to take up too much extra time, but I mean, I think this is still early, of course, in the early postoperative period, Gustavo. I think it sounds like it's only 1 week. So I think there could be a lot of different possibilities here that exist. And I think, you know, of course, inflammation and blood and pigment and everything else is what we think about. Of course, we have to think about, is this an angle closure situation or not? I imagine the angle is open. And I think we got to look for vitreous. I have seen cases where vitreous, I mean, I'm not by you, Gustavo, I'm sure you did a great job, but if there's vitreous in the AC, we had a case a few weeks ago that was presented where the vitreous was the problem and had to be gone back to the OR. And then lastly, you know, we can get later onset pigment dispersion and UG syndrome. Not usually in the first few days it's manifest, but after a month or more. And that typically would require an iridotomy. I think iridotomy is important to do when you do a fixated lens like this to the sclera, because you can get a sort of a reverse pupil block that can cause the iris to chafe on the lens itself. So, I mean, I think this is still early though. To me, it's kind of in the early postoperative period and you manage medically, and it could just simply be the inflammatory insult and the surgery that's decompensated the tubercular meshwork.
Or steroid responder.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I always mention that again, I guess at 1 week, unless they're a super responder, which can happen, is true. I think that's something to absolutely consider.
Daily 6 doses a day or 7 doses every 2 hours or something like that. Sometimes
I agree. I love it, man. Athanasios is not only worried about the retina, he's thinking about the cornea and glaucoma. I'm very impressed by you, man.
Well, Forlini was my teacher.
That's right.
An all-around globe surgeon. And
that's great. Very good point.
Everything. When you're in a hospital, you need to do anterior, posterior glaucoma and everything. You're obliged to by the rules. So we have to get to it. And also for the silicone oil, that it was a beautiful spoken last time, we have an idea that if you have cases like that with silicone oil, that means that they were not treated properly before that. Because if you want to remove a cataract, you have to remove the silicone oil and the cataract together, and it's not a problem because the posterior capsule, when you use a frag, the posterior capsule is very, very strong and very, very tough. So it's very difficult to break the posterior capsule when you're doing a frag. So with a frag, you remove the cataract, and then you have to remove the silicone oil anyway. Either to exchange it with a fresh one, 5,000 centistokes, or remove it, because if it's there without any purpose by removing the cataract, then it doesn't do anything to the eye. So patient has a problem. If it's really touched, you have to attach it. If it's attached, you have to remove it. If it's emulsified, you have to remove everything. So the thing we do is we do the cataract and immediately we go behind for the eye to check out if removing the silicone oil, the eye can withstand removal of silicone oil. And in difficult cases, when you remove the silicone oil, the trauma cases, they go back to detachment. On the table, we inject 5,700 cc centistoke silicone oil inside the eye in order to keep the eye calm and everything. And we don't think so much about the lens insertion because these people have a very, very low vision, and we'll just like to keep them seeing finger kind, so 120, and to be able to move around with his eye. So it's not so complicated because we have hundreds of cases like that from all over the world for silicone oil. I used to train with John Scott in silicone oil back in Cambridge. So we had this obligation every time. And they say, if you go for the cataract silicone oil, it has to be with a posterior segment surgeon that knows about cataract. It doesn't have to be half the cataract man and half the posterior segment surgeon. I think, George, you do everything yourself.
No, and I definitely do. But what I'm trying to say is, in the United States, it's a little bit difficult to do a phaco-vitrectomy. It's you basically the system allows you to either do one or the other. So certainly in a situation where you can do a phaco-vitrectomy, you can basically go start with the phaco, remove the oil, open up the posterior lens capsule, and then address the posterior pathology that there may be. No doubt about that. But in many of these cases that we have, it's a staged approach. And so in that situation, we can do the phaco. And then basically, if you have a view, then you can try to determine what you're going to do posteriorly and bring the patient back a few weeks later to do a more clear surgery. And most of the times, I think on a different lecture, I do not remove the oil, even in patients with that require reoperation. So I'll deal with the PVR through the oil. rather than do oil removal, then surgical surgery, then procedure. But the point is that there's patients that very well can have a cataract surgery done and then make a decision what we're going to do later. So I clearly understand what you're saying, but if the goal is to minimize surgical trauma, just do the cataract, then address the postoperative situation later, and you can always do a vitrectomy a few weeks later. I have no trouble with that. You know.
I cannot find Medicare. I cannot find Medicare or social economics. That's another story that we have to make a course. That different approaches according to different social economics for every country.
Absolutely.
It's not something vertical that everybody has to do the same things. And
can I ask one question?
Told me a lot how to do jungle vitrectomy, how to do Sao Paulo vitrectomy, how to do English vitrectomy and British vitrectomy. So it's different issues. And thank you very much for pointing out.
Can I ask one question here? Why there is a cataract and why there is a silicone in eye with natural lens? Because we know that it induces 100% cataract in at least 3 or 6 months after the tamponade.
So that goes to the same point that Dr. Athanasios made. And it goes into the issue that a lot of people outside of the United States will do a phaco-vitrectomy on every retinal detachment, whether they're going to use oil or not, or a lot of the retinal attachments. And I know a lot of friends, I could probably see friends in Canada that will have a macular hole with a mild nucleus carotid cataract and do a phaco-vitrectomy because they say, well, he's going to develop a cataract anyway. So we usually don't do that. And I personally don't agree necessarily. One of my main goals is to minimize surgical intervention. I think that the bigger the surgery, the more things that can go wrong. So the truth of the matter is that if I can fix a retinal detachment, I'll fix a retinal attachment and leave the lens in there. And I can always, the lens doesn't scare me, it doesn't worry me, I can take it down later. But it is true that but here's the thing, your goal on a patient is to remove the oil and have them have great vision. The moment you start thinking about simultaneous phaco-vitrectomy with oil, then questions start coming up. What power are you going to use? How are you calculating it? What are the best case scenarios? So if I put oil on a natural lens, my hope is to remove that oil later and then have that cataract dealt with appropriately at a later time, hopefully as a single operation. Now, alternatively, there are situations in which the lens doesn't let you see to fix the retinal detachment. Now, that's a different question in which you have two options in there. You can do a phaco-vitrectomy, or you can do a lensectomy, leave the patient aphakic, deal with the retinal detachment, and then deal with the lens implantation at a later time, or primarily. But I think it goes back to Dr. Athanasios' point that every center and every socioeconomic situation will kind of force you or nudge you in a certain direction. And I personally don't remove a lens that's not bothering my ability to fix the retina, even though I know it will get worse in the future.
Okay, but you know that if you leave the natural lens, your ability to shave the base is somehow not optimal because you are afraid to touch the posterior capsule.
I'm not afraid of it. I'll just deal with it. I'll deal with the peripheral vitrectomy. Every so often, every surgeon has dinged the lens from the back and you have to deal with that. But I find that I can do a retinal detachment on a phakic patient without any trouble, even if it's a giant break or a complex case. So to say, well, it's nice to do a phaco-vitrectomy. But I've also seen many problems in people that don't do often phaco-vitrectomies. So no, I still leave the lens intact if I can fix the retinal attachment. Even if it makes it a little bit harder, it's still easier. I don't have any trouble with that. And if I put oil, I'll deal with the oil. Take the oil out later, then deal with the cataract later. But I guess my intention is to limit the amount of procedures that are done at a single time on a patient. Yeah, and that's a philosophical approach that some people would disagree with.
Okay, but we have only one shot, and normally the first surgeon to enter the retinal detachment and to deal with it is the one that should save the eye, because we know that if we go to second, third, or etc. surgery, everything is lost. The first surgery is most important.
I would agree that the goal is to fix the retinal detachment on the first surgery with a single procedure. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do everything to the eye at the same time. You can definitely fix a retinal detachment on a phakic patient, even with oil, and not have to remove a natural lens that's clear.
You have to remember one thing, George, there, that you have to ask Lukan and everybody else who are attributed to combined surgery. What would happen if you have a posterior rupture and a break when you do a cataract with a retinal detachment behind and you have a dropped piece of lens on a retinal detachment? When you have a cataract complication before you start your retinal detachment?
Agreed. So the point is, for me, that the goal is to fix the retina, and the cataract becomes a secondary, the lens is a secondary issue that I only remove if I absolutely have to. But you're right, if you have a complication before fixing the retinal detachment, then that complication is limiting the ability for you to fix the problem that you were there in the first place.
I was going to just make a couple comments, Gustavo, just on the chat group here. There's a couple of questions about how do you take the cortex out when you have an IOL scaffold, and it's a good question. What I usually do is I just nudge the IOL over and basically work underneath the IOL with my instrumentation. And that's one thing I probably didn't point out, that the irrigation cannula is very handy to act like a second instrument, to maneuver around, to push and move. Sometimes you're doing some vitrectomy near the iris, you don't want to hit the iris. You can move it over with the irrigation cannula. Same thing with the IOL. We can lift up the IOL and go underneath it. And then the question from Ruben was about ultrasound parameters when we're trying to eat the fragment more efficiently during a PCR. I would argue actually to not increase the ultrasound. We actually want to, have more holdability. I think the vacuum needs to be increased, and you want to maintain occlusion as much as you can, carouseling the piece with some followability. So ultrasound causes chatter, and so it potentially may cause a piece to come off. And so we'd rather just nibble at it, and by nibbling at it, we basically carousel it. So typically I would do that, and I would, my fluidics don't change that much, other than I will reduce the flow rate a little bit, the irrigation flow a little bit, and work under viscoelastic. So that's just a couple of questions on the chat line there. And about the oil thing, talk to me later, man. I'll settle this debate.
Another question.
It would be a long debate.
About what is your preference of suturing the IOL to the sclera? When you presented that case that the phaco eat the whole bag.
Yeah, I mean, I have varying opinions on this. I mean, I think I've used a variety of approaches. Often, I've done a lot of sutured IOLs to the sclera, but I like to use a specific lens for that. And I've used the Yamane technique or modifications. I think it's a reasonable approach. In that particular patient, I actually ended up doing an iris sutured lens. And I still, believe it or not, like iris sutured lenses. If they're done right, I think they work very well, and it minimizes the need to do a big vitrectomy and to externalize haptics and anything else. And the iris is normal, and the patient is okay. I think it's a good idea. If the patient was 85 years old, I think it's okay to put an ACIOL in, even if you choose to. So for me, I go from ACIOL to artisan lens, to iris sutured lens with a 3-piece lens, to a Yamane technique as all options when the patient's aphakic. And I think I customize it based on those different parameters.
Do you have some kind of favorite lens for Yamane technique? I mean, comparing it with the Alcon lens, Abbott lenses, or do you find any difference with the different type of 3-piece lenses with the haptics, how they accommodate to the Yamane?
Yeah, well, the CT Lucia, the Zeiss CT Lucia, I think is optimal, right? Optimal, and I think you may agree with that. The problem, I guess, is access. It may not be always available. It's not always available on our shelf. We don't have it on consignment, but we can order it in. So when we plan it, we do CT Lucia. That being said, I've used a Sensar lens, the AR40 lens, fine, MA60 lens, fine. But the haptics can get crimped and bent and twisted, and that can result in some tilting. So, there's a fair amount of force on those haptics, right? We all know that when we put in the needle and we twist, especially the second haptic going through. So the C2 Lucia has been great, and I think that's what has been our gold standard so far, but we just need better lenses.
I have a question.
And if I can add to that, Ahmed, I think one of the things we use when we are doing a secondary implantation, it depends on our mood. Depends the day. Some day you want to do something, other days you want to do a different thing.
You're absolutely right, 100%, my friend.
But nobody talked about Carlevale lenses. Do you know Carlevale lenses?
Yeah, I don't have experience with this. I think it's a reasonable option. It's hydrophilic. I have to say, being North American.
Sorry. So now they're producing hydrophobic.
Hydrophobic. I think it's probably a good idea to do this. I think the design is a very interesting and good design. Sure.
It is easy, and you do it. And also, you have to remember, for the people that they don't know, when you just do the Yamani, you don't need only the lens to be specific. You need the needle to be. Not any needle, 25 gauge needle, is good for the Yamani. You have to have a needle that the bore is wider than the normal needle in order to be efficient to get it in. And
yeah,
also,
regular 30 gauge is just too small. The thin walled is perfect. We have used 27 gauge. I know it's not ideal, but it can be done with MA60 and 27 gauge. Not ideal, but you're right. You have to match the needle, ideally, yes.
The thin wall needles, it's a must.
That's not ideal.
Totally true.
I have a question to Ike about the iris fixated IOLs, because this is also my preferred way to deal with lost capsule and iris suturing. How often do you get UGH syndrome with iris fixated IOL?
I'll tell you one thing, it's less than our scleral fixated lenses. And here's the reason why, because the tilt is less with the three-piece lens on the iris, because it's suspended by the two haptics to the iris, and it's basically vaulted 10 degrees back. So it's always a fixed distance from the iris. A scleral fixated lens is not a fixed distance. It can be tilted, it can be too far anterior. It's going to be variable. And so I would argue it's less. Now, of course, it's a lot of technique, right? If you do a perfect Yamani technique in the right eye, correct eye, then I think you'll be okay. However, the problem is when you have a bigger eye and you have a zonular plane that's going to be more posterior, but you only go 2 millimeters back from the limbus, that's going to be too close to the iris. Mm-hmm. Again, if iris fixated lens, you're always going to be a set distance from the back of the iris. And if it's done right, and we published our technique and we have, 13, 14, 15 years of experience with it, it works really, really well. I have no problems. I'm glad you said that, Lukan, because many people argue with me on three-piece lenses to the iris, and they say, no way, this is terrible. But those of us who do them, I think they're very good. And I think that they require less vitrectomy. You can do it without an infusion line if you don't want it. And you don't have to have irrigation going out to the sclerotomy or anything like that could happen with other options. So I don't know. I think you have to be versatile in different options, though, for these cases.
I asked you on purpose because I recently was hit, obviously, in my YouTube channel by Steven Safran, why I iris suture lenses, etc. That is promoting my question to you, because this is my preferred way of dealing. It is predictable and it is easy way to deal with the situation, and I think it's right.
I agree. I mean, technically, maybe it's more challenging for some surgeons, perhaps, to get the right suture pass. If you catch too much iris, people can be ovalized. So there's techniques to avoid that. We presented this to not lock the knot until the IOL is behind the iris, then lock the knot. And I mean, there's no worry about an externalized haptic. I have seen infection from Yamani technique. I have seen erosions from Yamani technique. And I think this is a non-issue with iris suture lenses. So there are advantages. I'm not going to say it's perfect, of course, but I think it's something that is a worthy technique. And I have many cases that are like this. And of course, these are all complicated eyes. Can you get CME? Yes, with any approach. Can you get inflammation? Yes, with any approach. But I don't think there's anything greater. And last thing, Lukan, there's only one study, one randomized controlled trial looking at iris sutured versus scleral versus ACIOL. And it was published by Ken Kenyon in the 80s. And you know what that study showed? The least CME was with the iris suture lenses compared to sclera. So I think it's a worthy approach. It's just not very fashionable, but we don't do things for fashion. I mean, look at my hair. It's not fashionable. It doesn't matter.
There is another thing to note here. From a retinal point of view, in my experience and in the experience of my mother, which is professor of ophthalmology also, a lot of secondary retinal detachments are derived by sclerofixated IOLs. And if you, in my practice, I haven't noticed so much percentage of retinal detachments after iris fixated IOL compared to the sclerally fixated IOL, and it is understandable because you can clear the vitreous obviously really better when you fixate the lens to the iris compared to the scleral fixated IOL.
Can I ask you something? When you say scleral fixated, you mean scleral sutured or endosclerally done, like Yamani? If it's sutured,
Sutured.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure you're right, because the plane of it's foldable. The plane is not very good. It's tilted so many times, and we completely avoid scleral fixated suture lenses. But we have to make this difference. When you talk about endoscleral lenses now, we don't talk about suture lenses anymore. We've given up suture scleral lenses at all. We don't do it anymore. And the Yamani technique, it's good for experienced anterior surgeons. But the technique, the Bisoft that I show you, is for everybody because you don't play with the haptics. The haptics is the worst thing for endoscleral. Imagine to pull out a haptic and to break, or imagine to pull out a haptic and to bend. And then you have a lens that is floating on the surface of the eye, and you have to remove it, and it's very big. Also for the iris plane anterior chamber lenses or posterior chamber lenses, the problem is that you need to open 6 millimeters to get inside because they are not foldable for the iris plane lenses. So I would suggest for the time being, foldable lenses that go to the sclera have not been creating so many plane problems or so many macular edema problems like before. And I really love the iris suturing technique, which is much better than the scleral suturing technique, to my opinion. I believe in that. But now I'm changing, because I'm doing vitrectomy in all cases almost. It's very easy for me to get through the sclera. And 2 millimeters is a very bad plane, because sometimes you hit areas, you got some hemorrhages, you got some things you don't like to get so close. But if you go more than 2 millimeters, you don't have a plane for the lens. If you go up to the 2 millimeters, you go to the ciliary body. So it's a very dangerous thing where you stick your needle there. So, but it's a way of doing things. It's much easier, and it's comfortable for the endothelium again. Sorry for going back. I'll check all the time.
So guys, sorry interrupting you all. I want to give you to let you know the last things. We had almost 1,000 people watching us at the same time. I think it's a very good number. Want to thank you all, especially Catalina Dumitrescu from Romania, who was the great mind behind this, okay? Other thing, this whole webinar will be on Lukan Mishev's YouTube channel. People can check it later there. And I want to thank Susana, Ike, Athanasios, Jordi, Sourabh, Adrian, Gaston, Rodrigo, and Vlada for attending. I know our time is really precious, and I like very much to have you all with us together, and let's see if we can repeat it again and again. Thank you so much, you all.
Thank you guys. Love you guys. It's great to be with you.
Guys, it was a pleasure.
Bye, everybody. Good to see you.
Nice to see you all.
Keep well to the next webinar.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
No shaking hands. No shaking.
No shaking hands.
Stay home.
It's on the face.
Stay safe.